Hello and welcome back to the Disruptive Innovation Festival. My name is Leo Nutter. The issue of plastic waste has really caught the headlines in the last year to 2 years, and it's easy to see why. In a report written by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastics Economy initiative in 2016, it was estimated that around 95% of all plastic entering the economy ends up in landfill, leaches out into the environment, or is incinerated. And that's a lot of value lost, and it's estimated that that is around 80 to 120 billion US dollars every single year. And on top of that economic loss, there's environmental externalities. In the same report, it was predicted that in a business as usual scenario, by 2050, there's going to be as much plastic in the ocean as fish by mass. So it's clear that this is a major issue and something needs to be done about it. And something needs to be done about the way that we value and use plastics. The companies from whom we buy these plastic products off of play a really significant role in providing solutions to these issues. Redesigning products, choosing alternative materials, adopting new business models are but a few practical ways that businesses can change their way of doing things to reduce the amount of plastic that ends up leaching out into the environment. So how do companies choose the best approaches to reduce plastic waste across their supply chain? It's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Could these tricky decisions be simplified by assessing plastic products and packaging in a new way? To help answer this question and to help to understand how businesses can get plastics back and to retain their value, I'm really delighted to join Emma Burlow here to the DIF. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks, Leo. It's really great to be here.
So Emma, you're head of circular economy at Resource Futures, and I've been told, and you are one of the UK's leading specialists in circular economy and resource efficiency in business. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and the work you do at Resource Futures.
Yeah, great. It's very kind of you to say so, Leo. It's it's great to be here. Thanks to everyone who's dialed in so far to listen. Yeah, so we have a team of people at Resource Futures. We cover all aspects of circular economy, actually, but we focus very much on the research and evidence base behind circular economy, so helping to prove the case. We've recently doing some work with DEFRA around the cotton buds and straws bans. We're currently doing some work with the British Retail Consortium on deposit return, for example. So sorts of policy areas we're working on. We also do a lot of work around implementing circular economy, and that's my background really, translating policy and principle into kind of action and real business value. So we do a lot of work for Zero Waste Scotland, implementing their circular economy fund and support programme, I should say. And also a lot of work, exciting work now and on the increase around plastics and packaging with corporates. So the sort of questions that you can imagine are going on around the table are, you know, what's our policy on plastics? Do we need a strategy? Do we need a manifesto? Where do we start? Is this all hysteria? You know, is it a knee jerk? Am I at risk here? So those sorts of questions come to us. And because Resource Futures has a long heritage in waste and resources, we understand where waste goes. We understand the recycling infrastructure in the UK very fully. So we can talk to those companies and say, actually, this is what currently happens with your product or packaging. This is the impacts that you're actually seeing. And as you said in your introduction, starting to look at retaining some of that value. And importantly, given all the sort of background to exports to China and that sort of thing, trying to improve the aspect, the amount of packaging waste or plastic waste that we can recycle in the UK. And there are many aspects of that. It's a very complex picture, but it really helps because we're rooted in that sector, so we understand the realities behind that.
Great. And like you say, it's a complex issue with a lot of different stakeholders involved. But hopefully we can kind of break it apart a little bit today in the session. So I'm really looking forward to the next half an hour or so, and I'm sure the audience are as well. I just wanted to remind the online audience that they can get involved, submit their questions and comments into the session page just to the right-hand side of where you are watching this right now. And I will feed the questions through to Emma predominantly towards the end of the session. So yeah, give us your 2 cents, and we can get the audience involved as well. So now we can get stuck in. So the title of this session is Plastic by UsePhase, decision-making tools to tackle plastic waste. And I wanted to pick apart that the first aspect, the plastic by use phase. What exactly is the use phase of a product, or in this case, a plastic product?
Yeah, so to just step back a bit, so the reason we developed this framework, we were asked to look at some form of categorizing plastics to enable decision making. So everyone's familiar with the debate around plastics, and that's kind of constructive in places, but also unhelpful in others. So really, it was about trying to frame that conversation and give business users and other stakeholders a framework to use. So we sort of started off with the general hierarchy, conversations, and it's important to remember that hierarchy, the waste hierarchy, still applies very much central to any decision-making process around resource efficiency. But when you start looking at plastics in particular, where plastics are used and the way they're discarded is absolutely fundamental to how they will be captured, collected, and recycled. So if you start to think of things in more of a life cycle perspective, you have a design and production phase, if you like, a use phase, and a waste management or treatment phase. So any product that's put on the market in the UK or anywhere around the world will go through those 3 phases. Now, how you treat that product, or how your hope of getting that back for recycling, is very much affected by where its kind of dominant life cycle phase is. Or its dominant use phase. So when we start talking about use phases, we're really talking about the longevity of that product being in the marketplace, and importantly, where it will be when it reaches its end of life. I'll just say the flip side of that is if you went down a polymer route and you, for example, said, well, what do we do with polyester or polystyrene or HDPE? Okay, so you're looking at a product where that product, regardless of what it's made of, ends up will massively determine what you can do with it. So it was clear from the outset that looking at things from polymers didn't really help. If you've got something that's made out of PET that's in a plastic bottle, for example, we're very different to the PET that's used in a car, PET, the car, an aeroplane, or a house. So you're not going to be able to do the same. You're not going to be able to use the same collection systems or whatever. There's also an aspect that we'll come on to later about whether that item is likely to be littered. And that's something that's led to a lot of discussions around marine plastics. So there's a few things overlaid there, but essentially, we'll come on to the diagram in a minute. We started to look at products in terms of their use phase, so how long they are in use. Okay, so very short products are in use instantaneously almost, what we would commonly call disposable products. Cotton buds, quite a lot of medical items, single use. Single use, funnily enough, being, I heard this week, the most common word used this year or something in the Oxford Dictionary. It's going to be added to the Oxford Dictionary. So those are the very short life items. We then move through a cascade of kind of short life, very short life, short, medium, and long. And so by the time you get to long, you've got plastics that are embedded in things like carpets, your insulation in your homes, your car, aeroplanes, whatever. They're there for a long time, 10, 12 plus years. So we started to put categories like that, and it was a really interesting way to look at it. And then we developed this whole framework around that.
Great. Just wanted to touch on that before we dive into this framework. How is this different to the way in which companies have looked at it before? Has it been predominantly looking at the materials that have been used?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of confusion around materials, and because there are a lot of them. There's also been quite a lot of confusion around the end treatment of products. Maybe not a full understanding of what happens at the curbside or what happens at a recycling facility. So there's kind of been a presumption that someone else will deal with it. And then when you actually start to pull products apart, it becomes fairly obvious that the infrastructure that we have in the UK is not going to deal with that. And part of that, the whole mixed plastics situation that we're in has led to a lot of low-grade mixed plastic waste, which is not helping the economy at all, and is actually adding to the likelihood of leakage, because those products are low value. They end up getting sent to countries who will take them, who have less infrastructure than us. If you can create higher value plastic, it's got a higher chance of staying in the UK or in Europe, where it's going to be reprocessed into high value plastic again. So the situation has arisen because we haven't really thought about it from a use phase point of view. There's not an awful lot of life cycle thinking at the moment that goes into design for plastic products. I think that's fairly obvious to see. That, that's the question we all go, why do they make it like this? So there are a couple of new concepts here, but I've never seen the lifetime of a product used in this way before. And I was really excited when we came up with it. It was a really great piece of work. I'm really pleased that Resourcing the Future Partnership and CIWM and that really got behind it, because they wanted us to add something to the debate and not just keep pressing the same old messages. So it's a different lens, different filter. So it means that people can go, my products are in that category. Now I can see why that's important and what questions are relevant to me, rather than diving straight into the what's it made of, which is important. But before that, you've got things like, can you reuse it? Can you, can you design it, parts of it differently? Is refill an issue? And all sorts of things. You've got other things to get to before you even get to that what's it made of question.
So it's kind of reprioritizing what factors need to be considered before strategizing how to make better use of plastic.
Yeah, stepping back and also saying, where do my products fit in the time scale? Are they punching above their weight, if you like? Are they useful enough to warrant being disposable? Does function outweigh that impact? Or is their use phase, is their impact somewhat different? Is there impact in their production? And therefore we need to start looking at how they're produced and things like recycled content. So it's just pinpointing in a different way where the impact of that packaging is, rather than just assuming all plastic's bad and it's all a nightmare to get rid of. It's not. It's just, if you've got a product that has to be made out of a certain type of material and it's performing a very vital function, and that making it out of a different material would be, in life cycle terms or carbon terms, a really bad idea, or in functionality terms, a really bad idea, then you're not going to do it. You need to assess and just say that is the right material for that function. There are just too many products that are unnecessarily made of unrecyclable plastic. I think that's the problem. It's not plastic per se, it's non-recyclable plastics and mixed plastics, and then there's a whole communication piece that goes with that. It's no wonder why people are confused about it.
So perhaps the default position is to be completely anti-plastic. I think it's been quite an ongoing conversation, and especially in recent weeks, actually. I think there was a couple of shows on Radio 4 that were talking about the stigma attached to plastics, when actually we just need to think more sensibly about where they're being used and how we can better use them. And from what I've seen of this framework, and we'll get onto this, it'd be great to find out more about it. This framework looks like a way in which businesses, individuals can see what solutions can be applied to different types of plastics, and different types being the use phase.
Yeah, it's all about solutions. It's all about solutions. It's not. There are elements of plastic that are being misused, and I think those are being addressed by policy. So, there are elements that our waste infrastructure or our surge infrastructure can't currently deal with. So those, forgive the pun, but those are products that have almost slipped through the net, and so the first part of the decision tree that will come on to asks whether or not that product is A, appropriate, B, essential, those sorts of things. Now, it's quite a hard thing for a retailer to deal with, because obviously they're selling those and making there's a marketplace for them. But when you're dealing with this issue, you are asking those hard questions. You are saying, is this going to affect my brand negatively? Therefore, should I really take a hard look at it? And I don't think anyone's saying don't manufacture these products. I think they're just saying, think about it, and could it be done? Can you produce the same functionality in a more recycling friendly way? You know, and you can tick lots of boxes by doing that. You reduce, you know, marine plastic waste, but you also reduce the burden on things like sewage systems if it's a flushable item, and if it's an item that's commonly littered. You know, you're reducing burdens all over the place. So you can tick lots of boxes whilst, you know, showing the world that your brand actually has a conscience in terms of these things. So.
Absolutely, which is, I think, becoming more and more relevant as more people become more woke, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah.
We've touched upon the framework, and we've given a good introduction to UsePhase. I'd like to hand things over to you now and to give a good rundown of what this framework that you've been referring to is. And I'm aware that we've got a graphic to show everyone.
Yeah, great. So hopefully everyone can see that. So it's an infographic basically that reflects a very detailed report which is available, which we can share. So down the left-hand side, you can see the very short life, 2 categories: the short life, the medium, and the long life. Okay, so this goes back to what we were talking about. How long is this product in use? So the important thing is its use. We've split this very short life ones into 2 because we, again, felt that the products would be dealt with very differently based on their size. So small products have high leakage potential, as in they are more likely to be littered. Larger products.
On that point, briefly, what leakage potential? How is that measured? It's not purely subjective, is it? Yeah, it's a bit of a kind of consultancy term, is it leakage? But it basically is leaking from our waste management system. So it's leakage from the infrastructure. So it's stuff getting out when it shouldn't be getting out. So by default, small things escape more than big things. Larger items are more easily captured through things like curbside, litter bins, commercial waste collections, that sort of thing. So that's why we split those into medium and small. If we carry on down, so those are items that we would commonly call disposables: plastic cups, cutlery, sanitary products, the sort of things that have been in the kind of top 10 should these products be banned type conversations. Then we move on to short life, which is the big band in the middle. And if I just talk about what the percentages mean, because that's kind of why these bands are graded as they are. The percentages represent the amount of post-consumer waste generated in the UK, so the proportions. So the majority of plastic post-consumer waste produced in the UK is in this middle band, this short life band. So that's where there's greatest potential for us to increase recycling rates. The items at the top in the very short phase, arguably are causing a lot more of the press and the interest and that sort of thing. But actually, they're mainly because they're very small and they're very light. They make up quite a small proportion of our total waste, total plastic waste. As you go on to medium life, long life, you can see the proportions there. But again, those items will be mainly captured through, so car plastic, for example, is pretty much wholly captured through organised waste management, end-of-life vehicles systems. It's heavily regulated. Things like crates, even toys, that they can be reused, and they hang around quite a long time. I know there's a debate about very disposable, quick use toys, but we're talking about the general life phase of things. So both of those items in the medium and long life have got a leakage potential just of 1. And I should say that those little leakage drops are purely qualitative. They're based on quite a few kind of measures, but there's been no research accurately into that. We know what ends up on beaches. There is lots of data on that, and we know what is captured through the recycling system. So it's based on those assumptions, really. Great. Okay. Cool. Thanks for the elaboration. So that's a really interesting graphic, and to see that over half of the materials in the economy are actually kind of these, not the really, really short life products, these sachets, these single-use materials that you typically find in the headlines and washed up in images, but they're these products that are actually in the economy for longer, as much as 2 years, which is really fascinating. And I see that towards the right there are arrows that come off of them, and these are the different solutions.
Yeah.
So there's varying solutions for the different types of materials.
Yeah, they're suggestions. They're not, they're not set in stone. They're things to start you thinking about. If my product falls into one of these categories, what are the types of actions I might take? So, for example, let's contrast the very short life with the long life. And this is where I'm saying it may be the same polymer that's in use, but if you've got an item that's in the very, very short life, you really want to be thinking about it's still going to be a short life, so there's no point in making a durable cotton bud or straw, but you might want to make a reusable straw, and that's the way the market's gone. So a coffee cup, you don't really want a cardboard coffee cup that lasts for 3 uses. It's not really going to solve it, but you might want a reusable coffee cup that lasts for 25, 30 uses or whatever. So that the emphasis there is starting to think about replacing the disposable with the reusable. Now, when you've had some plastic in use for more than 12 years, you don't probably want to look at reuse. You don't want to reuse a car bumper or a wall insulation panel. Okay, and this comes up a lot when people go, oh, how do we reuse construction plastics? Well, you probably don't want to. You want to think about a way of reducing the impact of that item. So lots and lots of opportunity for recycled content, lots of opportunity for extending its life, modulability, design for modularity and repair. So there are different items there, but again, you wouldn't want to look at repairing an item in the very short use phase. So it's really quite interesting how these things all these options are there, but there's almost like a myriad of things. It's very difficult, like a maze. And what this tool is starting to do is to slot those options into places where they're most appropriate. And it's not trying to teach people to suck eggs, but when you've got very busy clients whose backgrounds aren't in waste or resources or even sustainability, we're trying to provide them with a bit of a route map and say, these are the things that are important. And then they sort of go, oh yeah, that seems obvious now. But there weren't any infographics out there. There wasn't any way of wading through what seems like a million options, none of which might apply to your product. That's sort of how it feels.
Yeah. So how you mentioned that businesses don't really have a lot of time to look at different alternatives and the different options and strategies out there. And this being a framework that they can use, what has the reaction been from business, and how have businesses applied this framework in practice? So,
this piece of work was published over the summer, so we've had some really good feedback from others in the industry that feel that it's a useful, tool. It's a useful way to start framing things. I would use this particular infographic as a context for a client to say, this is the big picture. Clients often say, where do we fit in the bigger scheme of things? What is our impact relative to other things? I think this is a really useful way of showing relative impacts. I would just say, sorry, I've just remembered one thing we were talking about previously about the sachets and the very short use. I don't want this to sound at all like those are insignificant anyway. I would say this is UK focused piece of work. So the balance of products in the UK will be very different to the balance of products overseas, and particularly in Asian markets, but equally, it's confused because of the export of waste. So not all of this waste is handled in the UK. So I've just come to that. So, but this is a UK focused piece of work. Right. So back onto where we were. Yes. What are clients saying? They're saying, just give me the big picture, and then I can drill down. And so this is really the big picture. This then starts them off on a path of which products should we be looking at, and then you can get onto the what can we do.
Great. So it's the which product and what can we do in a nutshell. That's fantastic. So this was the first part. This infographic gives an overview as to the different strategies that people can undertake based on the use phase of the plastic products that are in their in their products, in their plastic products. I'm also, I know that you're going to actually deep dive into one of these, into the short life product, which make up 52% of the market here in the UK, and businesses wanting to look at what they can do. You've actually Resource Futures put together a decision tree that they can follow, which we have.
Yeah, so there's a couple of these in the report if you read the full report, but they were there as in a kind of working, work for discussion, work in progress. So we're starting to pull these out now because I think they're really, really useful in terms of the next phase conversation. So setting the context, understanding that where you sit. And how your product ends up as waste, what it looks like as waste, how it's treated is really important. A lot of our clients don't fully understand what happens to their product, why maybe it's not captured. They won't even know if it is or it isn't. You can't stand on the conveyor belt and see if your product's being picked out. We know that certain things like milk bottles and clear bottles are picked because they're high value. But some clients are asking us, well, what happens to my product? And so you can even go back to the basics of, well, I'm a consumer, this is what I do with it. But then you've got all number of products where it's quite commonly accepted that consumers are confused. Black plastic, films, caps, lids on bottles, even in screw top cans, metal lids. Lots of people are still confused. Yogurt pots, there's a whole array of things. So if you've got products that are in those categories, this really starts to tease out, okay, so what are our options? And this is what we'll move on to now. So as Leo said, I chose the short use product element because that's where most people are operating. There's also been an enormous amount of talk about the disposables, so I think that's kind of in hand, shall we say. So it might be a bit small for people, but if I just sort of whiz through the main kind of areas, these are all questions you might ask yourself. Yes, no, simple kind of questions. There's going to be there are going to be situations where it's a kind of, well, maybe we need to look into that. But again, it's just to take you through a process. Simply, is the product essential appropriate? Well, most people are going to say yes to that, but you can insert the word packaging there and start to talk about excess packaging. So is that part of the packaging essential for a functionality point of view? So you may have a tie or a seal on a product that is essential to stop it leaking, okay? You may have, I've got one here, I'll start to bring in my props. You may have a sleeve that arguably isn't essential for the functionality of the product. Now, I'm not going to get into whether that's essential from a marketing point of view, but when we're talking about products and what happens at recycling centres, I'm going to just stick to that, okay? So there's a piece of material there that you could argue was or wasn't essential, okay? So you might start eliminating those sorts of things. So if you decide it's not essential or appropriate, you go straight to the right, eliminate or reduce. You could look at halving the size of it. You could look at taking it away altogether. So there are quite easy things there to do.
And sorry, on that point, Emma, these are quite simple changes in the design of products, which I think is quite pertinent for not just, actually for multiple different types of UsePhase products. It's the design process, and that's something that we've discussed quite a lot here at the
Yeah, and I've caught up with a few of those, podcasts and things, and it's been great. I think that's fabulous, and we work with designers who are very good at that. You need the business to make the decision first, so you need them to write a brief, and to write a brief, they need to understand what their strategy is, and otherwise you do tend to get kind of, well, we'll do this for this product, and we'll do that for that product. Oh, we could tweak this, and we could tweak that. And I think what I'm hearing from my clients is they want an overall strategy. They want to know kind of where they're heading, and then all the decisions can slot into that rather nicely, because they can't. It's not a case of just taking away all the plastic. We've gone through that loop now. We understand that plastic is very essential and useful. So they want to know now what they can do next. So then we move on down and we talk about, is there a reusable alternative? Now, this is quite a difficult one for lots of product manufacturers and retailers, because they are currently designing to a linear model. So this is where the circularity thing really becomes interesting. And you can start saying, okay, is refill an option? Is take back an option? Is reusing the packaging for something else an option? If it's a packaging item, even things like plant pots. We've been having this conversation with an organisation that manufactures plant pots. There are kind of reasons why they can't be reused, but could they be reused for something else, or do they go down to the recycling chain? So it's about taking those steps, looking through those steps. So if we assume reuse isn't feasible in this situation because we're looking at mainly food-related packaging and that sort of stuff, there may be a case where you say, right, we've looked at eradicating, eliminating, reducing. We can't do reuse for whatever reason, hygiene or safety or whatever. It's going to stay a single-use item. Okay, so you have some items that are still there. You can then say, okay, it's still going to be single-use, but could an alternative plastic be used, or a non-plastic alternative that would give it a higher value in the recycling chain, or give it a lower chance of being littered? So those are the two main things, really. There are lots of others. You might have things like embodied carbon or weight for things like logistics. So the carbon piece isn't massively covered in this diagram, because if we layered all that in, you'd be there, it'd be very, very dense. But I'm very, very conscious that item is here. So we do talk about life cycle thinking quite a lot during this, this work. So alternatives or stroke non-plastic materials. Okay, so here's another good example. So I would add that all my examples have come from high street supermarkets. So they're not. So I've tried to take examples that are on the same shelves as each other. You know what I mean? So some dishcloths in a plastic bag. It's polypropylene. It's number 5. But this crunchy plastic isn't currently recyclable at the curbside for any. Well, not many people at all. Few. So there's one item. The alternative on the same shelf are some other cloths, but with a paper wrapper, which is using the widely recycled label. So that's nice to see. Technically, this plastic is recyclable, but it's this recyclable, it's the able bit of the recyclable that trips people up in the UK, because we've only got a certain infrastructure to do it. So I think gone are the days when you can say it's recyclable, when really actually where are you going to take it? It might be recyclable industrially, but this is only ending up in one place, and that's under people's kitchen sinks, and then the packaging goes in the bin, So it's about, again, the use of the product. Really neat, I think, really easy, really simple, same brand, quite easy.
Yeah. So part of this there is the infrastructure that's in place in the country that we're looking at. Obviously, we're looking at the UK, who's
being realistic about that. Yeah.
So is that factored in the model at all? I mean, we're focusing on businesses at the moment and what they can do around redesign and changing the product and changing the materials that they're using. But could they influence in any way the infrastructure that's in place? Interesting.
I mean, this whole piece of work is based around improving recycling quality in the UK. Okay, so it's not, that is the angle it came from. Where we came to was, how do you do that? What actions need to happen? So it's a two-handed sword. Yes, we need to improve infrastructure. We need to invest in infrastructure. There are big economic kind of arguments around how we do that. It's kind of separate from the retailers, as in at the moment, and I should say at the moment, because we're moving through a phase of potential regulatory change around this. At the moment, the two things are very separate. With what's called EPR, extended producer responsibility, there will be a big shift in the way that retailers are able to influence, or at least fund through a taxation system, the infrastructure. But I think in reality they are quite separate. And what this report does is very much brings them together and says, look at the reality of where your product goes, where your packaging goes. And in my career, 20 odd years, it's really the first time that I'm sat in a room with people, product innovation people, actually having that conversation, because it's always very much been about, there's been a lot done around, toxicity and, durability even of products and that sort of thing. But this is the first time we've gone, okay, in this sector anyway, food packaging, really, what will happen to this, and if I change it, what will happen to it? So what simple steps can I make? So there's another example here, same shelf, both organic products. So basically, the same consumer would buy either of these. One in a they've both got nice labelling on, I will say that. Recycling label says not currently recycled. And this doesn't even have the number on it, so I can't tell you what it's made of. And a similar product in a paper packaging, which has no label to say recycle me on it, but it's paper. So I use this product at home, so it's not even a plastic lined paper. It does say on it somewhere that it's just paper. So those switches, I don't think, are beyond the pale. We're not asking people to make massive changes in design, put in whole refill systems, all this kind of scariness. You're just asking them to consider a more recyclable option. So that takes us a sort of halfway down. You then get to the point of, okay, we can do that, but we're going to stick with plastic, fine. But could you use more recycled plastic in content? Again, another thing that the company then needs to go away and explore. Or if you're going to go all plastic for whatever reason, it might be that the product keeps better or whatever, you might go for a product like this. But interestingly, the top and the bottom are both made out of the same material. So from a recycling perspective, that's really good. There's no contamination. The consumer can use that, rinse it out. It's clear. This is polypropylene. It's clear. That's good for recycling. Coloured plastics are not so great. So again, trying to keep it simple, using optimal colours, so clear in this case, you can see the product, and also using single polymers. So we're starting to get into that level of detail already, and you can just see how it all sort of chunks down together.
Great. I'm cautious of the amount of time that we've got left, and we've got quite a few questions coming through on the session page. But first of all, I wanted to fire away a question to you. I guess business first and foremost think about their bottom line. They think about costs and revenue, and they think about their profit. From the experience I know, it was only released quite recently. What are the costs to business, and do they really put a lot of is that a central part of their decision making and their thought process?
Yeah, very much so. I think it will depend in terms of, or it does depend, sorry, in terms of the brand, very much, and the understanding of the senior management of that business and the direction of travel. So you could expect a different response from some brands that are kind of trading on their ethical credentials than others, for example. So I think that's a useful background. You need to respect that and understand the environment they're working in. So I work with a major white goods manufacturer. They put a lot of items on the market, but they're not Miele and they're not Bosch. So they're not up there trading on those the same sort of credentials, and also they don't have the headroom in the premiums around cost. So any decision they make that has a cost implication is a really big one for them, because it will affect their price point on the high street. So absolutely, that's important. What I would say is products are being redesigned all the time, and one of the things that kind of, I suppose, does get my goat a bit is when products are redesigned in quite a complicated way that can't have been a cheap process. So I've got one more example. I went down the sort of sauces aisle, and I don't know if people have noticed, but a lot of these sort of ready-made packs are coming out now. So this is a pack with 4 different sachets in it. One is a metallized sachet, the other 3 are clear plastic. So this is quite, quite a lot of thought's gone into this and design time. And there's text on the inside. The outer is cardboard, but the pouches are mixed materials, not currently cycled. So there's a lot of design and innovation going into products. It's amazing the things you can buy, isn't it? So I don't think there's an issue there around design time and innovation time. I think where there's a slight issue is certainty around things like recycled content in polymers. So if you're looking for recycled PET, for example, which is very, it's becoming more popular, it's around, guarantee that's the right quality, suppliers, price, those things. There's a bit of fragility around that. People are very used to being able to buy virgin plastic from their suppliers. They understand how it acts. They understand where it's come from. So there's definitely work needs to be done, by the industry there.
Great. Cool. There are actually quite a few questions coming through from the session page, and I'm trying to go through quite a few. So the first one on the session page from Joe Miller, and she asks, is there a common concern that companies that you were working with have over the current media and public attention on plastic pollution?
A concern?
A concern that companies that you're working with have over the media or
the media
of plastic pollution.
Is there a concern? There's enough of a concern to pick up the phone, yes, and say, what does this mean to us? I think there's a certain amount of, I've certainly heard from my clients, is this something we should really be worrying about? Is this just a hysteria? Is it going to go away? I think that's starting to tail off now. People are not going away. Interestingly, if it had been a flash in the pan, and if we were not backing it up now with bans and things like that, and then we've got the resources of waste strategy coming out, and then there's circular economy packages from Europe. So what started off as media frenzy is actually being backed by things, and so therefore it's got legs now. It's got momentum, so it's not going away. I think there is a bit of concern. There's a bit of concern for brands that are trying to extend their ranges, and they're looking at new products, and they're saying, do I really want to launch this product in plastic packaging? And same questions apply. If it's the best packaging, if you have actually looked at all the options and this is the best solution, and you can tell your customers why, and I don't mean literally, but you can explain to them, how to recycle it, but you can justify that. It's just about it's starting to pique interest, and they are definitely more concerned than they were 2 years ago. Definitely.
Good. Of course. I mean, it kind of started out with more and more plastic washing up on oceans. Of course, David Attenborough did a fantastic job of highlighting it as an issue in Blue Planet. There's been a wealth of evidence being built up, not just from us here at the Foundation and the New Plastics Economy team, but also internationally. And I feel that there are policy infrastructure being put in place to address it, and also businesses, as we've heard from you today, who are really seriously considering the implications of utilising plastic in their value chains. I just wanted to move on to another question from thinkdiff.co. Asks, what are Emma's thoughts on the concerns that something like the 5p or soon to be, I think, 10p tax on plastic bags is simply just shifting the problem?
I'm not entirely sure what they mean by shifting the problem. I mean, the plastic bag tax demonstrated very simple fiscal measures can have quite a dramatic impact.
It was started in Wales, I believe, and that's the reason why it was extended to the rest of the UK.
Yeah, I mean, some village, there was a couple of villages, one village in Devon, I think, started, off themselves. Shifting the problem, I think it may be, it deals with one part of the problem. It doesn't deal with the overall problem. So, you can't make a policy for every single item. So, a lot of people have gone after plastic bags. They're very visual. Again, if you go back to some of the percentages, they don't make up a massive tonnage. It is a wasted opportunity if they're not recycled, exactly, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a slight issue around sort of tokenism. So let's ban that, let's ban this, all the rest of it. But I think what will happen is coming more and more with extended producer responsibility and the circular economy package. Those are much more principle-based measures. So they will look at things like recycled content, boom, across the board. So it doesn't concern me. I think all these things are good at raising awareness, to be honest. I don't think any of it's particularly negative. We just need to keep moving forward and to changing the principles around virgin plastics, fossil plastics, non-recyclables, and you can't do that product by product.
Right. So thank you. And there's a little there was an elaboration on the session page where they were referring to comparing it to a bag for life, for example, which uses possibly a multitude of materials that are potentially equally as environmentally damaging as plastic in its life cycle. But I guess you can argue that they could consider the use phase of the materials being used as they would do with plastic and come up with the most optimal solution from there.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's all about optimal solutions. So the bag for life per se is not a bad idea if it's replacing 20 or 30 single plastic bags. Great. I completely understand the argument and the life cycle argument that, to offset the carbon, it's a much denser product. There's a lot more embodied carbon in it. You would need to use it 20 times or whatever. I get that. But I think it moves us in the right direction. It's moving you towards a more circular solution because it's reuse ultimately against the disposable. So you're going to have to go there. Then you have to say, what percentage of that product is recycled content, and importantly, have we got the infrastructure to capture it? There's almost no point in changing something if you haven't got an end solution to it. You're just replacing one problem with another. So you do see bags for life floating down the stream and in trees and that sort of thing, but ultimately, if you take a step in the right direction towards bag for life, I mean, it's so interesting how people just adapted to that change, and yet people are so worried about what consumers will and won't accept. Oh, I can't change that because the consumer won't like it. Well, that just we just changed that overnight, and everyone just got on with it. So I hope that retailers will be more confident now and say, we are going to change this. You all know why we're going to change it. Get behind us. Explain to your consumers why you've done it. Personally, I think they'll love it. They're looking for opportunities to say this is a great product, and take that risk out of your your consumers emailing you saying, oh, I don't like this. Why have you wrapped this in this? And de-risk that just by saying, look, we're looking at it, and these are the steps we're going to take. We're going to optimize, what we're doing.
Great. We are now coming up to 50 minutes into the session. I think we could talk about this for another hour, perhaps, and we'd still be an interesting discussion. But I think perhaps there is a good way to come to a close. So thank you very much, Emma, for joining us at the DIF.
You're very welcome.
So you heard it here. To see where your business or businesses can improve plastic efficiency and reduce the amount of plastics being lost and leached out into the environment, look at the plastics, not by the polymer, first and foremost, but by the use phase. And this framework that Resource Futures have put together in recent months and that Emma has introduced us to is a great reference point to start from. And you can find out more on the Resource Futures website. That's linked in the session description just to the right-hand side of this stream. So do check it out to find out more and to get more updates as to what Resource Futures are doing in the space of plastic waste. So thank you, Emma, once again for your insight. It's great to have you here at the DIF.
Thank you very much.
While that may be all for this session, there's plenty more to get your teeth stuck into at thinkdiff.co. We're just over halfway through DIF 2018, and there's plenty of content to keep you satisfied. On Tuesday, the 20th, next week at 1 p.m. UK time, I mentioned them briefly in this session. The New Plastics Economy Initiative team from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, whose mission is to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy for plastics and for plastics packaging. We'll provide an update into their activities in the DIF Live Studio, so you can favorite that one in your using your DIF account. And earlier today, actually a couple of hours ago, we had the session transforming the sachet economy to a circular economy, which is quite pertinent to the discussion that we had today. It was a conversation with multi-award film director Mark Miley, I beg your pardon, and he's also a design innovator in the Philippines, and they talked about consumer behavior research and alternative models that can reduce plastic waste in the sachet economy. And as we mentioned, it may only be in the low percentages in terms of the amount of plastic here in the UK, but in the Asian market, that's it's a much higher percentage. But once again, this content that I've just recommended and all other content is available at thinkdif.co. Do check out the schedule. But for now, that's it from me, and that's it from Emma. Goodbye.